I entered my own home and found my wife with my best friend. When I uncovered the secret plot, I took my revenge, and they lost everything, while my wife. I woke up to the sound of the intercom buzzing. At first, I thought it was a mistake. No one ever visited me, and anyone who needed to reach me knew better than to show up unannounced. Still groggy, I checked the time, 8:37 a.m. Way too early for whatever this was. I ignored it at first, hoping it would stop, but the buzzing persisted, relentless. Eventually, I dragged myself out of bed and went to the panel to answer it. "Mr. Walker?" My assistant, Erica, sounded tense. "There's a woman here. She says it's urgent. I told her you weren't available, but she insists on seeing you." I frowned, leaning against the wall. Erica was usually good at keeping unwanted visitors away. Who was this person? I hadn't agreed to meet anyone today, or any day for that matter. I told Erica to send her away, but she hesitated. "She says it's about something personal, Mr. Walker. Something from your past." That got my attention. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the way Erica said it, like even she didn't fully believe it. Either way, I sighed and told her to send the woman up. I wasn't exactly in the mood for visitors. Living here, in the penthouse overlooking the city of Denver, had its perks. But mostly, I stayed inside, detached from everything around me. The skyline, once something I admired, now seemed like a steel and glass prison. The world below? Just a blur of people rushing around in lives I had no connection to. When the knock came at the door, I felt an odd sense of unease. I opened it, and there she was. A woman in her late 30s, sharply dressed but with a weary look on her face, like she had been through more than her fair share of hard times. "Mr. Walker," she said, stepping forward before I could invite her in. "My name is Sarah Miller. I'm with Social Services." That was unexpected. I didn't know anyone from Social Services, and I certainly didn't expect them to be knocking on my door. I gestured for her to sit, though everything about this felt off. "I know this is strange, and I apologize for coming unannounced," she started, pulling a letter out of her bag. "But I have something for you." A letter. I stared at the envelope, my name written across the front in handwriting I recognized instantly. "No, it couldn't be. It's from someone you used to know," she said carefully, as if trying to gauge my reaction. "Her name is Emily. Emily Ross." My breath caught. Emily. I hadn't heard that name in years. Not since everything fell apart. I didn't ask any questions, just took the letter from her and tore it open. The words inside were frantic, desperate. Emily was in trouble. Real trouble? She talked about mistakes she had made, about feeling like there was no way out. And then there was a line about her children. Her kids? They were in danger too, and she had no one left to turn to. It was like someone had opened a door I had long since locked. Memories I had buried deep, of a time when life had been simpler, when I was happy, came flooding back. Emily and I had been together a long time ago. Back then, I had been a different person. I had a wife, Lisa, a job I actually cared about, and a future that looked bright. But everything changed. I was working at a firm back then, one run by the Moore brothers. They were ruthless, the kind of bosses who didn't care about the people under them as long as the work got done. I was good at my job, but it came at a cost. The constant pressure, the long hours, the travel. It wore me down, and it wore down my marriage with Lisa too. At first, things between us were perfect. We had met when we were both young, and for years, we were inseparable. We had built a life together, one I thought would last forever. But slowly, the demands of work started to creep in. I was always traveling, always on a plane to some new meeting or conference, and Lisa grew resentful. She never said it outright, but I could see it in her eyes. The way she looked at me when I packed my bags yet again, the way she stopped asking when I would be home. We started to drift apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. I tried, but the more I tried, the more the job pulled me away. The Moores weren't just tough, they were reckless. They cut corners, took on risky deals, and didn't care about the consequences. And as one of their top guys, I had to deal with the fallout. It wasn't long before I realized the company was in serious trouble. Deadlines were missed, clients were angry, and the whole operation was teetering on the edge. But they kept pushing me, demanding more, and I was too deep in to walk away. All of it, the stress at work, the tension at home, started to weigh on me. And then, in the middle of it all, there was Emily. We had met through work. She was smart, funny, and we clicked in a way I hadn't clicked with anyone in a long time. I never meant for it to turn into anything serious, but it did. Emily was different from Lisa. She understood me in a way that Lisa couldn't, or maybe just didn't anymore. It wasn't long before I found myself spending more time with Emily than I should have. And eventually Lisa found out. That was the end of everything. She left me, and I was too ashamed to stop her. Emily and I tried to make it work for a while, but it never did. Too much baggage, too many mistakes. Eventually, we went our separate ways too. That was almost a decade ago, and I hadn't heard from her since. Until now. I looked up at Sarah Miller, who was sitting quietly, watching me as I read the letter. What does she want me to do? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Emily was asking for help, for me to step in where no one else could. She's asking for your help, Sarah said softly. She's in a very bad place, Mr. Walker, and she's worried about her children. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the letter heavy in my hands. Part of me wanted to just throw it away, forget about it, go back to the life I had built here, isolated and alone. But another part of me, maybe the part that still remembered what it was like to care about someone, couldn't do that. Emily had been a part of my life, and now she needed me. I'll need some time to think, I finally said. Sarah nodded, standing to leave. Of course, but please, don't take too long. Time isn't on her side. As she left, I sat there for a long time, the letter still clutched in my hand. I had spent years trying to forget that part of my life, to move on from the mistakes I had made. But now, it seemed like the past was coming back to find me, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. After Robert Taylor's sudden death, everything at the company began to change, and not for the better. Robert had been the stabilizing force at Taylor Industries. Sure, he was tough, demanding even, but at least he had a vision. His sons, David and Nathan, were different. They didn't have the same sense of purpose, and it showed immediately after they took over. I expected that, with Robert gone, there might be an opportunity for me to move up. I'd been loyal to the company for years, worked my ass off through late nights and impossible deadlines. I figured if anyone deserved a promotion, it was me. But instead of promoting me or offering me any real acknowledgement, David and Nathan started making changes that only served their own interests. One of their first decisions was to move the office from downtown Denver to a more upscale part of town. They said it was to give the company a more modern look, but it was obvious they just wanted a fancier place to show off. It felt unnecessary, a waste of money, but I didn't have a say in the matter. They started to shift responsibilities around, too, handing out shares of the company to executives who hadn't put in half the time I had. I was passed over for everything. No promotion, no shares, just more work with less support. It was hard not to feel alienated. I'd been there for years, and now I was just another cog in the machine. The new management structure only made things worse. They brought in their own people, and suddenly, I was dealing with middlemen who had no idea how the company actually worked. I started to wonder if I had a future there at all. But the biggest blow didn't come from the office. It came from home. Lisa and I had been struggling for a while, but things hit a new low after Robert's death. Lisa worked as a secretary for David, and lately, it seemed like she was spending more time with him than she was with me. It wasn't just the time. She'd come home talking about how smart he was, how much potential he had. I could feel the jealousy building inside me every time she mentioned his name. It wasn't just professional admiration. I could see it in the way she talked about him, the way she smiled when she mentioned something funny he'd said. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the more I thought about it, the more it ate away at me. I started to wonder if Lisa was staying late at work because of the job, or because of David. One night, I confronted her about it, and of course, she denied it. She said I was overreacting, that David was just her boss, nothing more. But I wasn't convinced. The tension between us grew after that. I began to feel like I was losing her, and it only made me more suspicious. The breaking point came when I was assigned to fly out to Houston to resolve a contract issue with the Carters. Lisa was upset because we had planned to go to a play that weekend. something we hadn't done in months. I promised her we'd reschedule, but she didn't want to hear it. She was angry, and I couldn't blame her. I had been letting work come first for so long, and now it was costing me my marriage. Still, I didn't have a choice. I had to go. The company was falling apart under David and Nathan's leadership, and if I didn't deal with the Carter contract, we were going to lose a major client. I packed my bags, got to the airport early, and tried calling Lisa one last time before I boarded the plane. She didn't pick up. Just as I was about to head through security, I spotted her. She was walking toward me, and for a second, I thought she had come to see me off, maybe to try and make peace. But as she got closer, I saw David with her. My stomach turned. What the hell was he doing here? Lisa didn't look at me when she reached me. She just said she had come to say goodbye, but her tone was cold, distant. I asked her what David was doing there, and she shrugged, saying he was giving her a ride home. I didn't believe it for a second. We exchanged a few heated words, too public for a full-blown argument, but enough to make it clear that things were bad between us. I watched as she turned and walked away with David. I was fuming. The suspicion, the jealousy, it all came crashing down in that moment. I boarded the plane, but my mind wasn't on the business trip. All I could think about was what Lisa and David were doing, what had been going on between them behind my back. By the time I landed in Houston, I was a mess. I tried calling Lisa again, but she didn't answer. I sent her a text, but no reply. The silence only made my doubts worse. I started to wonder if there was even a point in trying to fix things between us. Maybe our marriage was already over, and I had just been too blind to see it. In Houston, I was greeted by John Carter, the CEO of Carter Industries, and his assistant, Brian. The contract issue was important, but the entire meeting felt off. John was polite enough, but there was something about the way he spoke to me, like he was feeling me out for something more than just business. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the contract. Over dinner that evening, John started asking questions that had nothing to do with the deal. He wanted to know how things were going at Taylor Industries, what I thought of the new leadership, and whether I was happy with my position there. At first, I thought he was just making small talk, but the more he pressed, the more I began to suspect that he had another motive. Was he trying to poach me? It wouldn't have been the first time a competitor tried to lure someone away. And given how things were going at Taylor Industries, I couldn't say I wasn't tempted, but I was still loyal, despite everything. I wasn't ready to jump ship, at least, not yet. The meeting with John ended on a strange note. He didn't come out and offer me anything, but I could tell that he was leaving the door open, waiting for me to make the next move. As I walked back to my hotel, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, my career at Taylor Industries was going nowhere. On the other, I wasn't sure if I was ready to turn my back on everything I had worked for. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Between the mess with Lisa and the uncertainty at work, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to just walk away from it all, start fresh somewhere new. But another part of me knew that running away wasn't going to fix anything. I was stuck in a life that felt like it was falling apart, and I had no idea how to put the pieces back together. That dinner with Harrison Industries board left me with a strange feeling, one I couldn't shake. From the moment I walked in, it was clear that the focus was on me. John Harrison had introduced me like I was some kind of guest of honor, not just a representative from another company handling a contract. Throughout the evening, I noticed how people kept coming over to talk to me, ask me questions, and make comments about my impressive experience and future prospects. It wasn't subtle, but they were trying to make it seem that way. Even Diana, John Harrison's assistant, seemed unusually attentive. She acted more like my personal assistant for the evening, ensuring I had everything I needed and always staying by my side. I could tell she was more than just John's right-hand woman. She was deeply involved in the business and had an understanding of its inner workings. She kept making small, pointed comments, hinting at possibilities. By the time the main course had been served, I started feeling like they were laying the groundwork for something bigger. At first, I thought I was just overthinking it, but as the evening dragged on, it became clearer. They were testing me, trying to see how open I was to the idea of joining them. They didn't say it outright, but John's questions, the constant flattery, Diana's attention, it all pointed to one thing. They had plans for me, bigger than just handling a contract. It wasn't a completely outlandish idea. After all, Harrison Industries was a competitor to Taylor Industries, and given the current mess back at Taylor with David and Nathan running the show, it wasn't hard to imagine why they might be interested in pulling me over. But I wasn't sure if I was ready to even consider that. My loyalty, though fraying, was still with Taylor Industries, despite the way things were falling apart. What made it all worse was that I couldn't stop thinking about Lisa. During the entire dinner, I had tried calling her multiple times, but my calls went straight to voicemail. She wasn't at home, and she wasn't answering her work phone either. I had no idea where she was, and the longer she stayed silent, the more I started to worry. I couldn't get the image of her and David out of my head. Ever since that incident at the airport, my suspicions had only grown. I tried to push the thoughts aside, telling myself I was being irrational, but something felt wrong. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. It didn't help that I hadn't heard from her since I left for Houston. After the dinner ended, I sat alone in my hotel room, trying to make sense of everything. I knew I needed to deal with the issues at work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on behind my back. When I called Lisa again the next morning and still got no response, I felt a sinking dread in my gut. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had a brief conversation with Nathan Taylor later that day. He called to check in on the progress with the Harrison contract, but it quickly became clear that his priorities were elsewhere. He mentioned that David had been spending more time with Lisa lately, and though he framed it casually, like it was no big deal, I could tell there was something more behind his words. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Was he trying to warn me? Or was it some sort of passive-aggressive jab? Either way, the doubts I had been suppressing came rushing to the surface. I started piecing things together. The late nights, the excuses, her distant behavior. Everything pointed to the possibility that I was being deceived, and not just at work. My marriage was crumbling, and I had been too focused on my career to see it happening. Later that day, I joined some colleagues from Harrison Industries for a round of golf. It was supposed to be a casual networking opportunity, a way to build rapport with the team, but even there, I noticed strange behavior. One of the guys, an executive named Mark, made a few cryptic remarks about loyalty and career moves. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. Harrison Industries was definitely interested in poaching me. And Diana, who was also present, made a comment that really stuck with me. She mentioned, almost offhandedly, that if I ever needed to return to the UK quietly, without anyone noticing, she could help arrange that. It was an odd thing to say, and it made me even more suspicious. After the golf game, I couldn't stop thinking about what Diana had said. Why would she offer something like that unless they thought I was on the verge of leaving Taylor Industries? Or worse, maybe they thought I had a reason to hide. I made up my mind. I couldn't just sit in Houston any longer, wondering what was happening back home. I booked a flight back to Denver, deciding to cut the trip short. I needed to find out what was going on with Lisa and David. The whole situation had spiraled out of control, and I wasn't going to wait any longer to confront it. When I got back home, the house was empty. Lisa wasn't there, and the place felt eerily quiet. I wandered through the rooms, looking for any sign of where she might be, but everything looked normal. It was like she hadn't even been home in days. Her clothes were still in the closet, her personal things untouched, but there was no indication of where she had gone. I tried calling her again, but there was still no answer. I didn't know what to do, so I waited. I sat in the living room, feeling exhausted from the trip and the weight of everything that had been building up over the past few days. Eventually, I must have dozed off because I was jolted awake by the sound of a car pulling up outside. I glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. I got up and walked to the window, peering through the curtains. My heart sank when I saw Lisa's car in the driveway. But she wasn't alone. David was with her. I watched as they got out of the car, talking quietly, too close for comfort. They didn't see me standing there, watching. They walked up to the front door, and I heard the sound of keys rattling as Lisa unlocked it. The door swung open, and they stepped inside, still oblivious to my presence. I stood there in the shadows, feeling a mixture of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Lisa finally saw me standing there, and her face froze. The shock in her eyes was unmistakable. Everything I had feared, everything I had suspected, had just been confirmed in that one moment. When I saw Lisa standing there in the entryway with David, my blood boiled. She stood there, frozen, wearing almost nothing, clearly disheveled. And David had the audacity to be there, half-dressed as well, right in my house. There was no misunderstanding it. The suspicions I'd been wrestling with for weeks were confirmed in an instant. I didn't need to ask questions. I didn't need to hear their excuses. I reacted on pure instinct. I moved toward David with rage I hadn't felt in years. He didn't have time to back away before I was on him. I swung hard, my fist connecting with his face, sending him stumbling backward into the hallway wall. He tried to raise his arms to defend himself, but I wasn't giving him a chance. I hit him again and again, my knuckles bruising with each impact. I wasn't thinking, just acting, just releasing all the anger and betrayal that had been festering inside me for so long. Lisa screamed for me to stop, but her voice barely registered. She tried to pull me away, but I shoved her aside. She hit the floor, and David crumpled in a heap near the front door. He wasn't fighting back anymore, just trying to protect himself from the onslaught. At some point, I stopped hitting him. I'm not sure why, maybe because he wasn't worth it anymore, or maybe because I'd already done enough damage. I grabbed him by the shirt and dragged him toward the door. He was bleeding, barely able to stand, but I didn't care. I shoved him outside and slammed the door shut behind him. Lisa stood up, tears streaming down her face. She started to say something, probably an excuse, probably an apology, but I didn't care. I grabbed her by the arm and forced her out of the house as well. She stumbled on the steps, still trying to get me to listen, but I wasn't going to. I slammed the door in her face, locking it behind me. She didn't give up. I could hear her banging on the door, screaming at me to let her in, to just listen to her. I ignored her. I didn't want to hear whatever pathetic excuse she had for betraying me. The pounding on the door continued for what felt like hours, and then it moved to the windows. I heard the sound of glass shattering and rushed to the living room, where Lisa had broken a window with her hand. Blood was smeared across the broken glass, and she stood there, sobbing, her hand dripping with blood. I just stood there, watching her, emotionless. She was hurt, but I didn't feel anything for her anymore. The betrayal was too deep. I couldn't even muster pity for her in that moment. Eventually, a neighbor must have heard the commotion, because soon after, police lights flashed outside. An ambulance arrived, too, and they took her away. I watched through the broken window as they bandaged her hand, loaded her into the ambulance, and drove away. David was still out there, sitting on the curb, holding his bleeding face, but I didn't care about him either. The police knocked on the door, asking if I wanted to press charges or file a report, but I didn't. I just wanted them all gone. I told them to take Lisa and David with them, and I'd deal with the rest myself. Once the house was finally quiet again, I started packing up Lisa's things. I didn't wait for an explanation, didn't wait for her to come crawling back with apologies or excuses. I went straight to her closet, grabbed her clothes, her shoes, her makeup, everything. I stuffed it all into garbage bags and tossed them into the garage. I wanted her gone, every trace of her out of my house. The life we had built together over the years had turned into a lie, and I didn't want any part of it anymore. The next morning, I called a lawyer and started the divorce process. There wasn't much to think about. There was no salvaging what we had. Whatever feelings I might have had for her were gone, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. I wanted out, and I wanted out fast. Lisa came back a few days later to collect her things. She tried to talk to me again, standing at the front door, looking pathetic, but I wouldn't let her in. I told her everything she owned was in the garage, and if she wanted it, she could take it and leave. I could see the shock and hurt on her face, but I didn't care anymore. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. She begged me to listen, to give her a chance to explain, but I couldn't. I didn't want to hear it. I told her to leave, and after a long pause, she did. That was the last time I saw her. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had built a life with, was now just a stranger to me. Work was the only thing left to distract me, but even that had lost its meaning. I couldn't focus on the projects, the meetings, the endless grind that had consumed my life for so long. It all seemed pointless now. The betrayal at home had bled into my professional life, and I knew I couldn't stay at Taylor Industries anymore. Not with David still working there, not with the memories of everything that had happened lingering over me like a dark cloud. Diana called me one morning, letting me know that Henry Harrison wanted to meet with me. It was clear what was happening. After the incident with David, after everything had come crashing down around me, I knew it was time to leave the company. I wasn't going to stick around and pretend that I could go back to the way things were. The offer from Harrison Industries was on the table, and while I hadn't decided to take it yet, I knew I needed to make a change. I began to arrange everything for a quick exit. I cleaned out my office, erased all my personal data from the work computers, and submitted my resignation. There wasn't much ceremony to it. I didn't say goodbye to many people. There wasn't anyone I cared enough about to bother. I handed in my resignation to Nathan and left without looking back. The severance package they offered me was generous enough, but even that didn't matter much to me. I just wanted to be done with it all. I put the house up for sale a week later. The memories of Lisa, the betrayal, the fights, it was all too much to live with. I couldn't stay in that house, not after everything that had happened. It was too big, too empty, and too full of ghosts I didn't want to face. Selling it was just another step in wiping the slate clean. I moved into an apartment downtown, much smaller, but at least it felt like a fresh start. I didn't bring much with me, just the essentials. I didn't need much anymore. The house, the marriage, the career, they all felt like pieces of a life I didn't recognize anymore. For the first time in years, I found myself with time. Time to think, time to reflect on everything that had happened. I didn't have a plan for the future yet, but I knew I needed to take a few months to figure things out. Harrison Industries was still an option, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to jump into another job so quickly. I needed space, distance, and a chance to decide what I really wanted from my life. For now, I was just focusing on getting through each day. The anger had subsided, replaced by a numbness that I didn't fully understand yet. Maybe it would pass, maybe it wouldn't, but at least I had control over my life again, and that was more than I'd had in a long time. After the divorce, the tension between Lisa and me didn't disappear. If anything, it got worse. We had to meet several times to finalize the legal side of things. Division of property, financial settlements, the usual ugly business that comes with a failed marriage. Every time we sat across from each other, it felt like we were two people who had forgotten how to communicate. The love we had once shared had turned into something bitter, sharp, and every conversation ended in an argument. At first, the lawyers tried to mediate, to keep things civil, but that never lasted. We both had our grievances, our wounds that hadn't healed, and every legal meeting felt like we were tearing open old scars. Lisa would bring up the past, how I hadn't been there for her, how work had consumed me, how she felt neglected. I couldn't deny any of it, but I wasn't going to let her throw everything on me. I reminded her of her betrayal, of David, of how she had destroyed our marriage. It didn't take much for these meetings to spiral out of control, with raised voices and accusations flying across the table. The worst of it happened during one meeting that was supposed to be routine. We were at the lawyer's office, going over the final property settlement. Everything had been settled on paper, but Lisa wasn't satisfied. She wanted more. More money, more assets, something that I couldn't give her. Not because I wasn't willing, but because she wanted a piece of my life that no longer existed. We started shouting, and before I knew it, the whole thing had escalated beyond anything I'd expected. She accused me of ruining her life, and I shot back that she had already done that herself. The argument spilled out into the hallway, and soon enough, someone called the police. They showed up to de-escalate the situation, but by then, the damage had been done. We both looked pathetic, standing there in front of the officers, barely able to stand each other's presence. After that day, we agreed to let the lawyers handle everything without any more face-to-face meetings. It was clear that we were beyond repair, and nothing good would come from continuing to confront each other. Around this time, I got a call from Henry Harrison. He wanted to meet in person, and given everything that had happened recently with the company and my personal life, I figured it was about business. I didn't expect the news he was about to drop on me. When we met, Henry wasted no time in telling me about the late Robert Taylor's plans. Apparently, before his death, Robert had seen what was coming. He had known his sons, David and Nathan, were not fit to run the company, and he had taken steps to ensure that his life's work wouldn't fall apart after he was gone. What he did was shocking. Robert had transferred control of his assets to me. Me, not his sons, not any of the other executives, but me. I was now the main shareholder in Taylor Industries, and with that came a level of wealth and power that I hadn't anticipated. Henry explained that Robert had always admired my work ethic, my dedication, and the way I handled the business. He saw me as the future of the company, not his sons. He left me with the responsibility of deciding how to manage it all, knowing that I could either save the company or let it fall, depending on what I chose to do. The shock took a while to settle in. I had gone from being just another executive in a collapsing company to the owner of a vast fortune and the main decision-maker for its future. But with that power came difficult choices. Henry laid it out for me. Robert had deliberately left the company to David and Nathan, knowing full well they would drive it into the ground. He had wanted them to fail, to learn a hard lesson. And they did. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy. It was time for me and Henry to step in, buy it out, and merge it with Harrison Industries. That was Robert's ultimate plan, and now it was up to me to see it through. As much as I hated David, I couldn't deny the grim satisfaction I felt in knowing that Robert had planned this all along. David and Nathan had thought they were inheriting their father's empire, but in reality, they had been handed a sinking ship. And now, it was mine to either salvage or let go. While I was dealing with the corporate side of things, I started hearing rumors about Lisa and David's personal lives. After our divorce, Lisa had married David. I'm not sure why, maybe out of guilt, maybe because she thought they could build something real out of the wreckage of what we had all been through. But it didn't last long. The marriage crumbled just as quickly as it had begun. They had twins together, but that didn't seem to help. David left her soon after the children were born, leaving her to raise the kids on her own. He wasn't the type to stick around when things got difficult, and I wasn't surprised. I heard about her struggles through mutual contacts. She was struggling financially, emotionally, and with 2 kids to take care of, she was barely holding it together. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy for her, but another part of me couldn't forget what she had done to me. Still, I didn't wish this kind of life on anyone. Then came the news I didn't expect. Lisa had tried to end her life. She had taken an overdose of medication, and if it hadn't been for a neighbor who found her in time, she would have succeeded. The news hit me harder than I thought it would. Despite everything, despite the anger, the betrayal, the divorce, she had been a part of my life for so long. The idea that she had reached a point where she felt like she had no way out shook me. Social services contacted me, probably because they knew we had only recently divorced, and despite everything, I arranged for the best medical care I could. I didn't visit her in the hospital, I couldn't, but I donated a large sum to ensure she got the treatment she needed. It was the least I could do, even if I didn't want to be directly involved in her life anymore. I thought about going to see her. There were moments when I almost got in the car and drove to the hospital, but every time, I stopped myself. I knew what would happen if I went. I would get pulled back in, and I couldn't let that happen. I had spent too long rebuilding my life after the divorce to let her drag me down again. I had to keep moving forward, no matter how much guilt or sadness I felt for what had happened to her. Instead, I focused on the present, on the future. I had a lot of decisions to make about Taylor Industries, about what I wanted to do with my life now that everything had changed. Lily, my assistant, had been a steady presence through all of this. She was the one who reminded me to keep my priorities straight, to focus on the things that mattered. She suggested that I spend more time with my daughter, Olivia. With everything that had happened over the past few years, I had drifted away from the people who truly mattered to me. It was time to change that. I decided to visit Olivia and reconnect with her. She was growing up fast, and I didn't want to miss out on any more of her life. I had been so caught up in my own problems, my own career, and the mess with Lisa that I hadn't been the father I should have been. Henry Harrison became more of a mentor to me during this period. He had seen the way things were headed with the company and had been preparing me for this moment, even when I didn't realize it. Spending time with him helped me clear my head and figure out what I wanted to do next. The merger with Harrison Industries was the logical next step, and while it wasn't going to be easy, it was the best way to move forward. As I spent more time with Henry and Olivia, I started to see what Lily had been talking about. Life wasn't just about work or success, or even the failures of the past. It was about the people who were still with me, the ones who had stuck around through everything. The business was important, and I was ready to take on the challenges that came with being the main shareholder of Taylor Industries. But more importantly, I was ready to start living for the future, instead of constantly looking back at what had gone wrong. There were new opportunities ahead of me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face them.